Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this Microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this article is entitled Wells, Daniel Hanmer. So, Daniel H. Wells is another way of saying that. He was a counselor in the first presidency under Brigham Young, and he was not in the Quorum of the 12. But after Brigham Young's death and the first presidency was dissolved, they didn't quite know what to do with him. There were two of them. There was him and John W. Young. Yes? Yeah, John W. Young. And the two of them kind of were, like, it was kind of the birth of the assistants to the 12. Although they weren't really called that. They were called counselors to the 12 after Brigham Young's death, but they just didn't know what to do with him. But I don't really know anything at all about his life. So I am interested to find out more about it. And yeah, that's about all I know. And that when he preached, it tended to be very doctrinal. That's about all I know about him. So, I'll be interested to find out more about him. He also has an interesting middle name, Hanmer. I originally thought it said Hammer, but it's not. It has an N instead of an M. So, Hanmer. So, Wells, Daniel Hanmer, second counselor to President Brigham Young from 1857 to 1877, was the son of Daniel Wells and Catherine Chapin, and was born in Trenton, Oneida County, New York, October 27, 1814. His father served in the War of 1812 and was a descendant of the celebrated Thomas Wells, the fourth governor of Connecticut, who was several times elected alternately as governor and lieutenant governor of that colony. Okay, cool. Daniel H. Wells' mother was the daughter of David Chapin, the Revolutionary soldier and connected with one of the oldest and most distinguished New England families. He served under the immediate command of Washington during the greater part of the War of Independence. In 1826, when he was but 12 years of age, Daniel H. lost his father, and 6 years later, together with his mother and sister, he moved to Ohio, and the following spring to Illinois. He took up his abode at Commerce, then a small village, but afterwards noted as the Mormon city of Nauvoo. Really, is that how he came in contact with the church, or did he see them in Ohio? Here he was elected constable and later justice of the peace. He was also an officer of the first militia organization of the district. In politics, he was a Whig and figured prominently in the political conventions of the period. There's a picture. Yeah, this is a relatively classic picture. Once again, as most of the pictures in this volume is quite fuzzy. But yeah, first of all, it wasn't printed the best quality, and second of all, it is quite old. Yeah. As an ardent champion of universal liberty and a foe to oppression in every form, he was highly esteemed by people of all parties and creeds, and frequently acted as arbitrator in difficulties between neighbors and families. Well, that is pretty cool. Because, I mean, that acting as a mediator between, like, people with some sort of grudge against each other, like, that's impressive. You have to have a really good finesse of people and a way of persuading people to listen to reason, so that's quite impressive. Squire Wells was noted in that early day as a man of strict integrity, with a sense of justice and impartiality. Okay, that's why they chose him, yeah? In 1839, when the Saints, fleeing from Missouri, settled at Commerce, he aided in securing for them a cordial welcome. Well, good for him. Among other pieces of property, he owned 80 acres of land on the bluff. This he platted into city lots, which he let the poor and persecuted refugees have at very low figures and on a long time for a payment. This endeared him to the people and determined the location of the chief part of the city, and of the temple, which was built on land that had belonged to him. Wow! You know, I think this is the first time we've met somebody who lived in Commerce before the Saints got there. I mean, seriously, I had no idea that he was there first, and he already owned land and basically gifted it to the Saints, like, I mean, at very, very good terms. So good for him. Like, that's a very charitable thing to do. On making the acquaintance of the prophet Joseph Smith, he became strongly attached to him, though then unconnected with the church. When the charter was granted by the Illinois legislature to the city of Nauvoo, he was elected an alderman and a member of the city council, also a regent of the university and a brigadier general of the Nauvoo Legion. He was prominent in the city affairs and supported every public measure for the progress and welfare of the citizens. When the opposition to the Mormons reached its height, General Wells remained on the side of the assailed people and would not join in any of the movements for their injury, which is very much to his credit, yes, because a lot of people at that time did. So good for him, keeping his integrity and saying, like, no, I saw these people from the beginning, they didn't do anything wrong, and standing up for their rights as human beings. So that's awesome. The murder of the prophet and patriarch Joseph and Hyrum aroused his deepest indignation, and he strongly protested against the demand of the governor of the state for the arms of the Legion, which was made under the pretext that the people of Nauvoo might attempt to avenge the slaughter of their leaders. But it was not until the exodus of the main body of the church and the people who remained in the city were in their direst extremity, being attacked by their enemies in violation of a solemn compact, that this sterling champion of the oppressed cast in his lot for life with the Latter-day Saints. Wow. After his baptism on August 9th, 1846, he gave the church his full faith and support. That is so impressive to me. Like, you see what's going to happen to you too if you decide to join this group, and he does it anyway because he knows it's the right thing to do. I am very impressed with this dude. Wow. In the Battle of Nauvoo, General Wells was practically the leading spirit. It sounds like it. Colonel Jenson was taken sick, and Lieutenant Colonel Cutler assumed the command. Brother Wells was his aide, and on his white charger was a prominent target for the enemy's bullets. His house was also fired upon repeatedly. He escaped unharmed. Wow. And during the 3 days' siege was a tower of strength to the men who were fighting for home and family. When the city was evacuated, he was one of the last to leave, and being fired upon by the enemy's cannon after crossing the river into Iowa, he sent one of the balls with his compliments to the governor of that state as a specimen of Illinois' respect for its obligations. Wow. Like, he just makes very bold statements, does he not? Wow. One of the terms of the treaty between the Saints and the mob was that the former should cross into Iowa unmolested and have their arms returned to them. Brother Wells rode day and night in a one-horse buggy to reach the main body of the exiled Mormons, that teams might be immediately sent back for the remnant that had been expelled from Nauvoo. After settling up his affairs in Illinois, he started for the West and came to Utah in 1848, acting as aide-de-camp to President Brigham Young on the second journey of the pioneers. When Great Salt Lake City was laid out, Brother Wells drew a lot in the 8th Ward, but as President Young desired his near presence, he moved to the east side of the Eagle Gate and subsequently to the land east of the Deseret News Office, where he occupied the small adobe houses which stood there until a recent date, and recent when this was written in 1901, and where most of his children were born. Brother Wells took an active part in the organization and was elected to the first Legislative Council and appointed as state attorney, and was also elected Major General of the Nauvoo Legion, the state militia, by the General Assembly, May 26, 1849. He received the rank of Lieutenant General of the Legion, March 27, 1852, and was commissioned to that office by Governor Brigham Young, March 7, 1855. Okay, a lot of dates, and they're slightly non-important dates. On the passage of the territorial militia law providing for the election of general officers, he was re-elected Lieutenant General April 6, 1857. In the Indian troubles that arose in Utah County and afterwards in Sanpete County, General Wells took the field in person, routing the savages at Provo and other places and saving the Sanpete and Sevier settlements from the disaster that subsequently threatened them. I do not like that language. It's terrible. Yeah, and I don't really consider that terribly admirable either. All right, moving on. I'm sorry. I'm kind of skipping over that because I don't want to delve too deeply into something that's terribly racist. These Indian campaigns were conducted with great military skill and success and cost a great deal of money, men, munitions, and provisions having to be largely furnished from Salt Lake City in the north. It was a biddy-doo-dah. A claim for over $1 million against the United States remains to this day unpaid, though made out in due and detailed form, in the same manner as the Oregon claim, which was settled long ago. Yeah. General Wells was in command of the Echo Canyon expedition in 1857-58 and conducted it with signal skill under the direction of Governor Brigham Young without shedding one drop of blood. Well, that's something at least. Yeah, but does that mean without shedding one drop of white blood or any blood? I'm just asking the question. Because right now, that's like the worst thing about his character so far. Like, that he was willing to fight for the oppressed was absolutely fantastic. I'm all for that. But that he was like fighting against Native Americans who are already down is just ridiculous. Okay. I understand he had to defend himself. I'm not stupid. Yeah, I do understand about that. But I just don't like the way that they're talking about it and the way that it was brought about at the time. Yeah, I don't think it's fair to anyone who was there first. His fearless character, cool head, and executive talent were here exhibited in a manner that won for him unfading renown among the Mormon people. Honorable Daniel H. Wells was a member of the Legislative Council in the Territorial Assembly for many terms, and of most of the conventions that framed constitutions for Utah's statehood. His clear perception of legal points and strong regard for constitutional principles rendered him a valuable advisor and able legislator. Yeah, it sounds like he would have been a lawyer if he had gone to law school, yeah? He was appointed second counselor to President Brigham Young January 4th, 1857, filling the vacancy occasioned by the death of President Jedediah M. Grant, who we talked about last time, yeah? Brother Wells had previously been ordained an apostle, and with Presidents Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, he visited the saints throughout the territory, aided in locating and organizing many settlements, and gave counsel in relation to the affairs of the church. He was also the superintendent of public works, occupying that position until 1864. In the absence of President Young, he was frequently left in charge of affairs and was looked to for advice in important matters. October 28, 1871, President Wells was arrested on a trumped-up charge of being accessory to the murder of Richard Yates at the mouth of Echo Canyon in 1857. Well, was he, though? The notorious Bill Hickman confessed to having done the deed. Oh, well then he wasn't, but was induced to implicate General Wells, alleging that the occurrence took place while he was in charge of the Echo Canyon expedition. He was sent to Fort Douglas for safekeeping, where he received the most courteous treatment from General Morrow, who regarded the whole proceeding as an outrage. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, let's think about this. So if he was the general, he was in charge of the group, yeah? And one person in the group went out and murdered somebody. Are you then responsible for that person's behavior? Because in my opinion, unless he was ordered to go murder that person, I don't see how he would be. Yeah? Did he have him under control? No. But, like, is that possible in the group of people? Like, at what point should he have had him under control? You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just... That's a good question. I don't know all of the particulars, and I think that it is possible he could have had some liability. I don't know that that was the case in this case. So, benefit of the doubt, I would say he probably wasn't responsible. However, I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't there, and I'm not a lawyer, so there you go. However, on Monday the 31st, being brought before Judge McKean, oh, I've heard of that dude, application was made that he be admitted to bail. The attorneys advised him that such an application would be in vain, but his confidence was complete that he would be successful, and he insisted upon that the attempt should be made. Okay, we'll try. In spite of the claim of the prosecution that this was a charge of murder in the first degree, Judge McKean took into consideration all the circumstances, including the fact that the defendant was a mayor of the city, and to the surprise of the entire community, he accepted bail in the sum of $50,000, the prosecution demanding $500,000, and the prisoner was released. Well, good for him. The thing is, Judge McKean is quite well known to because he's the one who sentenced a lot of the people during the polygamy trials, and he put in really harsh sentences a lot of the times just because they were Mormon. He was pretty anti-Mormon. But, I mean, yeah, bail in the sum of $50,000, that's pretty dang high. He was lining his own pockets, in my opinion. So, allegedly, in my opinion. There you go. Once again, I wasn't there, but that sounds like it to me. The whole charge, of course, fell to the ground, and there was not the slightest foundation for it. In fact, in the summer of 1876, he was placed in charge of a company to visit and encourage the newly started settlements in Arizona. While crossing the Colorado River at Lee's Ferry, the boat, containing his traveling wagon and outfit and a number of the party, was capsized and thrown into the rushing and turbulent stream. He was only an indifferent swimmer, but though weighed down with his boots and clothing, he calmly struck out for the shore, reaching it without wetting his necktie. Wow. Okay, well then he's a better swimmer than he is letting on. He always regarded his escape as miraculous, feeling as though unseen hands were supporting him. Bishop Lorenzo W. Roundy, who was regarded as an expert swimmer, was drowned, and the whole outfit was swept away and lost. Yeah, that's pretty miraculous, I'm not going to lie. His position as one of the first presidency he occupied until the decease of President Young, August 29, 1877. When the 12 apostles succeeded to the presidency, Brother Wells was appointed a counselor to that quorum. Yeah, they didn't know what to do with him and John W. Young, which position he held until his death. In 1864, he went on a mission to Great Britain, and with Elder Brigham Young Jr. presided over all the missions in Europe, visiting various countries, ministering to the people, and superintending the emigration. He returned to Utah in the fall of 1865. Yeah, 65? Okay, yeah, that's right. And in 1868 took charge of the endowment house, where he ministered in the sacred ordinances for the living and the dead for many years. In February 1866, he was elected mayor of Salt Lake City. He was re-elected successfully until 1876. The first occasion on which women exercised the elective franchise in Utah was on February 14, 1870, when they cast their ballots for Daniel H. Wells for mayor and for the other members of the city council. In 1872, he was one of the prime movers in starting the gas works in Salt Lake City, in which he largely invested and which proved a successful enterprise. At the general election, held August 3, 1874, I think, when a delegate to Congress was to be elected, Robert N. Baskin had been nominated as the Liberal candidate in opposition to Honorable George Q. Cannon, and the U.S. Marshal General Maxwell attempted to take control of the election. No trouble occurred except at the 5th precinct, the polling place for which was at the City Hall. Here a large number of armed deputy marshals with a mob of liberals interfered with the police in their efforts to preserve the peace. Some arrests being made by the police, they were in turn arrested by deputy marshals, and excitement ran high. Mayor Wells was on the spot and endeavored to keep down the tumult. He was set upon by the mob, brutally struck, and his coat nearly torn from his back. What does this have to do with Brother Wells? Okay, I'm sorry. The police came to his rescue, the mob was forced back, and the mayor appeared on the balcony, and amid cries of "Shoot him! Shoot him!" he read the Riot Act and commanded the police to disperse the crowd. Well, good for him, because that was the right thing to do. This was done at the expense of some broken heads, but was effectual, and the mayor and the police held their places and vindicated the law. Well, good for him. The next morning, Mayor Wells was arrested and put under $4,000 bonds. Why? The chief of police and several of his officers were also arrested, but the whole matter was dropped, and it was everywhere acknowledged that the city officials simply did their duty, and that Mayor Wells had exhibited fearless determination, maintained the dignity of his office, and prevented the serious conflict desired by those who provoked the disturbance to be used for political purposes. Well, okay. It's really random, though. Like, I feel like that's a bit random. But I guess as mayor of the Salt Lake City, that was kind of a big responsibility. It was his job to do everything that he could to calm down the riot. When President Young was sent to the penitentiary for contempt of court March 11, 1875, for not complying with an absurd order by Judge McKean, President Wells accompanied him and stayed with him until his release. Now, that was really kind. Actually, that one's really interesting because if you listen to the April 1875, I believe it is, General Conference, he was still in house arrest. He was still under house arrest. They wouldn't let him come to conference. So they actually postponed the conference. They kept pushing it back a week and back a week and back a week until he was released. And until he could be there. And it finally happened at the end of April. I think it was April 28th or something like that. It was actually pretty cool to see. His imprisonment, however, lasted but one day. Judge McKean lost his official head for this act of tyrannical folly. In 1879, Brother Wells again saw the inside of the Utah Penitentiary, this time being imprisoned himself for contempt of court in refusing to disclose the secret and sacred rites of the endowment house. Well, that's ridiculous. You're allowed to have, sacred things you don't reveal to the government. Sheesh. As a witness in the Miles polygamy case on May 2nd, 1879, he was interrogated by the prosecuting attorney in relation to clothing worn in those ceremonies. Wow. He declined to answer, for which he was remanded to the custody of the marshal. And the next day, being cited to appear and questioned again, he replied, "I declined to answer that question yesterday, and do so today, because I am under moral and sacred obligations to not answer, and it is interwoven into my character never to betray a friend, a brother, my country, my God, or my religion." This was a clear exhibition of the character of the man. Not for worlds would he swerve from that position. He was sentenced to a fine of $100 and imprisonment for 2 days. He paid the penalty, and on May 6th he was escorted from the penitentiary by a procession, hastily but thoroughly organized, consisting of about 10,000 people with banners, mottos, flags, and signs of rejoicing, one of the most remarkable gatherings and demonstrations of respect ever witnessed in the United States of America. That's so cool. Oh gosh, that's so cool. Because, that's crazy. That's crazy. Because, they had an entire procession of 10,000 people escorting him out of prison after he made bail because they were happy that he hadn't revealed more than he had, and he was willing to go to prison for it. That's impressive. An immense but peaceful meeting was subsequently held in the Tabernacle, where appropriate speeches were made. In December 1884, Counselor Wells crossed the ocean again and presided over the European mission, visiting the branches and conferences throughout the British Isles and also in Scandinavia, Germany, and Switzerland. His health was feeble, but he labored energetically until his release in January 1887. When he returned to the United States, and after visiting relatives in the East, reached his home again in July of that year, and was joyfully welcomed by his family and friends. When the Manti Temple was completed and dedicated, he was appointed to take charge as president, May 21st, 1888. Here he was in congenial element. The salvation of the dead was the chief attraction to him in the doctrines expounded to him by Joseph Smith the prophet, and led to his investigation and acceptance of the gospel. Really? So he really loved, ordinances for the dead. That's really cool. Yeah? He officiated in the temple and performed his duties as counselor to the 12 until stricken with the illness which culminated in his death. Okay. He came to Salt Lake City in March 14th, 1891, and received attention that loving hearts and hands could bestow. He had suffered for many years with a painful physical ailment, and which they're not going to tell us what it was, right? But his heroic nature and strong will enabled him to surmount the difficulties it occasioned. Pleuropneumonia supervened. And okay, there's pleuropneumonia. Well, that's pneumonia. I understand. It's buildup of liquid in the lungs that it causes an infection. Yeah. And at 1 o'clock, March 24th, 1891, he peacefully departed, being without pain and conscious to the last. Good. How could you be without pain and conscious though? Because you're not be able to breathe. I have a little bit of a hard time believing that he was without pain, and I have a hard time believing that he was conscious. I mean, wow, okay, maybe. Brother Wells would have been a leading character in any community, standing 6 feet in height with prominent features and organs of perception. Organs of perception, what does that mean? His appearance was striking, while his manner was unassuming. Apparently stern in his demeanor, he was really one of the kindest of men, full of sympathy and affection, ready to aid the distressed with a heart so big that he would welcome the world to partake of his hospitality and share with him whatever he had. His house was always open to his friends, and while acting as mayor of Salt Lake City, he entertained many distinguished visitors, both Americans and foreigners, who respected him for his virtues, while disagreeing with his views on religion. He was a firm friend and supporter of education, was for many years Chancellor and Regent of the University of Deseret, and considered that a good education was the best legacy he could bequeath to his children. He was also a great reader, an ardent admirer of the drama, which was his chief amusement, and a promoter of music, science, and art. In politics, he was a Republican from the time of the organization of the party. He took earnest interest in national politics, in which he was thoroughly versed, and was ever ready to maintain his views, though never a bitter or contentious partisan. He was engaged in many business enterprises, but placing his public duties first, his own affairs became somewhat complicated, and at one time he was heavily involved. But of late years he was gradually extricated from embarrassment and was able to leave his family the possessors of unencumbered yet modest homes. Brother Wells had 7 wives, 6 of whom survived him, by whom he had 37 children. Of these, 24, namely 13 sons and 11 daughters, were living at the time of his demise. Oh, wow. Okay, so he predeceased a good handful of his children. Like a third. Like, that's a lot. Sheesh. He left 25 living grandchildren. His faith in God and in this system called Mormonism was unbounded, and his integrity to the principles of the gospel was unwavering. His testimony to the divine mission of Joseph Smith was powerful, and from the time he received it, by the manifestations of the Holy Spirit, he never doubted it or feared to face the opposition of its enemies. He was a noble spirit, and he performed a noble work on the earth. Huh? That was really, really interesting. So, to sum it up, he was very much a public figure, and I feel like he was comfortable being a public figure as being a leader in the Nauvoo Legion, in the militia, / military. Like, they didn't have military at the time, so militia was the closest they could come. And also being mayor of Salt Lake City, and being in the first presidency of the church, and then counselor to the 12. He was very comfortable in this very visible role. He seemed very, very generous with his property, and was willing to give it to others whenever they might need it more than he did. The only thing I really don't like was his behavior towards the Native Americans. I feel like it smacks of racism, yeah? And I don't have a problem with someone defending themselves if they are in danger, but it didn't really sound like that was the case in this case. I mean, I could be wrong, I wasn't there, but yeah, that's the only thing about him so far that really, really bothers me. Everything else is fine. He's mostly positive, so, talking about weighing someone in the balance is, does the good outweigh the bad? Does the bad outweigh the good? In this case, I would say the good outweighs the bad by quite a bit. The worst thing being prejudice against Native Americans, which was quite common at the time. I would say it's more a product of his time than anything else. All right, let's take a look at the Wikipedia article, do a little bit of fact checking, and see how much of this information we already knew and how much is new to us. Daniel Hanmer Wells, October 27th, 1814 to March 24th, 1891, was an American apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, and the 3rd mayor of Salt Lake City. Biography. Early life. Wells was born in Trenton, New York, a member of the 6th generation of his family in America. His original immigrant ancestor was Thomas Wells, spelled slightly differently, who arrived in Massachusetts in 1635 and was the only man in Connecticut's history to hold all 4 top offices: governor, deputy governor, treasurer, and secretary. That's interesting. Wells was also a descendant of John Webster, 5th governor of Connecticut. Okay. A few years after his death of his father in 1826, Daniel H. Wells left New York with his mother, Catherine Chapin Wells, and his younger sister, Catherine C. Wells, and moved to Illinois. Wells arrived in Hancock County, Illinois in 1835. He lived in Commerce, Illinois, later renamed Nauvoo, and was a major landowner and justice of the peace there for several years prior to the arrival of a large numbers of Latter-day Saints in 1839. Relationship with the Latter-day Saints. Although not a member of the Latter-day Saints, Wells was considered by opponents of the church to be a Jack Mormon, a term originally applied to non-Mormons who were friendly to or defended the Latter-day Saints. In Nauvoo, he served on the city council as a judge. Actually, as far as I'm aware, people still use the term Jack Mormon. I've heard it said before. I mean, maybe they don't anymore, but they did when I was a child. So, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's just somebody who basically follows the rules but isn't baptized. It's also called a dry Mormon. Yeah. Mobs invaded Nauvoo after the assassination of church founder Joseph Smith. Wells defended the city and fought as a lieutenant general of Nauvoo Legion, and also provided shelter for evacuees. Wells was not baptized into the LDS Church until August 9, 1846. He immigrated to the Salt Lake Valley with the Mormon pioneers in 1848. Wells, that's a typo, it should say Wells. Wells, respected for his integrity and loyal service, he was elected Attorney General in the state of Deseret in 1849. When Jedediah M. Grant died in 1856, Wells was ordained an apostle of the LDS Church and set apart as second counselor to Brigham Young in the first presidency of the church. Although serving as an apostle, Wells was never sustained as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Yeah, because he wasn't in the quorum. Upon Young's death in 1877, Wells was sustained as a counselor to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, a position he held until his death. Once again, because they didn't know what to do with him. On behalf of Brigham Young, Wells dedicated the St. George Temple on April 6, 1877. They didn't mention that. From 1888 to 1891, he was the first president of the Manti, Utah Temple. Cool. From 1848 until 1863, Wells was superintendent of public works for the LDS Church and presided over the continuing construction of the Salt Lake Temple, completed 1893, and the Salt Lake Tabernacle, completed 1867. When Wells was no longer in the position, the operation of the church's public works program was placed under the supervision of the presiding bishopric. In 1866, Wells was elected mayor of Salt Lake City as a member of the newly formed People's Party. Really, because they just said, in the other article, they said he was Republican. And now they're saying he was part of the People's Party? Because that's a different thing. He was re-elected in both 1872 and 1874. Okay, so I'm assuming that the other article got it wrong then. He wasn't a Republican. In 1871, he was arrested by U.S. Marshals on charges related to polygamy. Shocking. Wells served twice as president of the European Mission of the LDS Church, first in 1864 to 65, and again in 1884 to 87. Extermination order against Timpanogos. Now, they didn't mention this before, so... On January 31st, 1850, Wells drafted orders for Captain George D. Grant to exterminate the Timpanogos, known as Special Order Number 2. Oh my gosh, was that a whole Native American tribe? The decision was the result of a meeting with Isaac Higbee, Bishop of Fort Utah, together with the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Higbee reported conflict between the pioneers and the Timpanogos, and it was unanimously decided that the only way to keep Fort Utah would be to exterminate the Timpanogos. Oh, great. Let's just... a little bit of genocide, you know, no big deal. Ugh, gross. The initial detachment commenced battle on February 8, 1850, under Captain Grant. However, after hearing reports of poor attitude of the settlers in working with Grant's troops, Brigham Young asked Wells to lead the detachment. On February 11th, Wells arrived and split the army into two. One contingent followed the trail of some Timpanogos who had fled up Rock Canyon. Wells led the other contingent south toward the Spanish Fork River. He divided them into smaller parties and searched the southern way for native peoples to kill. Lovely. On February 14th at Table Rock near the southeastern shore of Utah Lake, one of the smaller hunting parties captured a band of Utes. Yeah, but Utes aren't Timpanogos, now are they? Lieutenant Gunnison of the Stansbury expedition reported that the Mormons promised to be friendly to the Timpanogos men, but then lined up the men to be executed in front of their families. Oh my gosh. Some attempted to flee across the frozen lake, but the Mormons ran after them on horseback and shot them. At least 11 Ute men were killed. In total, 1 militiaman and an estimated 102 Timpanogos were killed. Oh my gosh. That's awful. Solidly the worst thing he did. Solidly. Like by 100,000 times. Gosh, everything else he did was so good, and then this. Are you kidding me? Civil War. Wells worked with Brigham Young to form the Lot Smith Cavalry Company. Wells also commanded the Utah Territorial Militia during the American Civil War and the Morrisite War. Zippity-doo-dah. Yuck. That, it loses a lot of respect. Like, let's just go commit genocide. It's awesome. I'm so sorry. It makes me sorry just to have read this. I'm sorry to anyone whose ancestors went through something like this, but the thing is, they don't have any descendants. There's nobody to even apologize to. It's that bad. Personal life. Wells married Eliza Rebecca Robinson in 1837, and with her had one son, Albert Emery Wells. His wife refused to accompany Wells to Utah in 1848 and later divorced him. Okay. Between 1849 and 1852, Wells married 6 additional wives: Louisa Free, with whom he had 8 children; Martha Gibbons Harris, with whom he had 7 children; Lydia Ann Alley, with whom he had 6 children; Susan Hannah Alley, with whom he had 4 children. Are they related? I'm guessing they are. Hannah Corilla Free, with whom he had 8 children, probably related to his second wife; and Emmeline Blanche Woodward, with whom he had 3 children. Louisa Free, Hannah Free, and Emmeline Woodward were all previously married and divorced or widowed. Each had 1 or more children whom Wells adopted and reared as his own. Okay, well, I can respect that. In 1852, Wells married his 7th wife, future Relief Society president, Emmeline B. Wells. Oh, they had 3 daughters. I did not know that she was married to him. Not gonna lie, I'm pretty sure Emmeline B. Wells is slightly better known to Daniel H. Wells, although they're pretty neck and neck, but they're close. But I think Emmeline B. Wells is slightly more recognizable to the average member of the church. So I am skipping the whole lists of children. If you are interested, go ahead and take a look, but I'm not going to read them out. There's too many. All right, Wells died in Salt Lake City at age of 76 and was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery. Wells' son, by his wife Martha G. Harris, Heber Manning Wells, was the first governor of the state of Utah, serving from 1896 to 1905. Now, why did they throw that in with his death information? They could have at least started a new paragraph. But, yeah. You know, that's so frustrating because there are so many positive things that were said about him, and then just to have something that bad in the middle is crazy. That people were prejudiced against Native Americans, I just don't understand it. So just to look it up really quickly, a very brief overview. The Timpanogos are a tribe of Native Americans who inhabited a large part of central Utah, in particular, an area from Utah Lake east to the Uinta Mountains and south into present-day Sanpete County. It's not a big area. It's not a big area. They kind of kept to themselves. Like, if they had given them a little bit wider of a berth, they probably would have left them alone. I'm sorry, I wasn't there, like I said before, but that's awful. That's really awful. And like I said, I'd love to apologize to their descendants, but I can't. Because if they were all killed, then they don't have any descendants. Oh, that's awful. And I'm so sorry. I have to kind of process that a little bit. But I'm beginning to change my mind. Of all of the good and wonderful, amazing things he did, this just about switches it back in the other direction and makes him a bad person. Yeah. I am of two minds on Daniel H. Wells. He had such a prejudice against Native Americans that he let it cloud his judgment and took over, in my opinion. In my opinion. Once again, I wasn't there. I don't know every circumstance. However, genocide tends to not be the answer to things like this. You can go after individuals. You do not go after entire groups of people. Yeah. That really bothers me. And anyways, I hope it didn't ruin it completely for you. I hope you at least enjoyed learning about Daniel H. Wells. And if you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you in the next video.